So honestly, as I see it, no challenges to the Finance Commission on these two accounts. But what I feel this commission has, unlike any other commission, is a tremendous opportunity to actually relook the fiscal federal space, the modalities, and the functioning. Prior to in the previous session, and I was listening in, Professor Govindarao, a veteran, I don't think he's here, of fiscal federalism, while he was commenting on Professor Narayana's paper, mentioned that fiscal federalism is not about common sense. I will stick to common sense. So let the theories be apart, and I'll point out why there is need to change the way we are functioning. From the time the Finance Commission was set up, the first commission was set up, everything that could have changed in this economy has changed. We have moved from a closed economy to an open economy. We have moved from an open economy to an open regulated economy. We have moved from state socialism to business liberalism. We have a complete change in the institutional landscape of federalism. Planning Commission is gone. Its diktats on various states are gone. We now have a Niti Aayog, which only Niti Aayog knows what it does. The budget for states has changed. There is no longer a planned budget or non-planned budget. We are back to revenue and capital basics. And of course, which brings me to the topic that's been assigned for the technical session, is that the indirect tax regime has been completely changed with GST coming in. Despite all this, in all these changes, the only constant is how the Finance Commission is constituted and what it does. So I'll go back, as I said, to common sense and say, because such massive changes have happened, there is need to relook at the design of fiscal federalism and how we understand it, how we should write from issues which Professor Narayana raised in terms of weights, allocations, specifics, migrations. These are specifics, but the bigger picture is that there is need to change because fundamentally the economy has changed. And that, to my mind, is an opportunity that this Finance Commission has. This opportunity was missed by the 15th Commission, which was constituted post-GST, but then anticipating the kind of stuff that has happened, the terms of reference did tie up the Commission quite a lot. And it took a very veteran bureaucrat by the name of Mr. N.K. Singh to navigate that and present, I would say, a half-decent award. So two issues I'd like to highlight here. I'll be very specific and I'll be very brief. One, of course, is the impact of GST on Finance Commission. So far, Finance Commission has not recognized the existence of GST regime in its award. And I'm talking about the 15th Commission. Nor does the terms of reference of the 16th Commission bind them into looking at how the indirect tax regime has changed and how has the tax regime changed. From the perspective of fiscal federalism, the 122nd Constitutional Amendment of 2016 gave union and states concurrent powers of taxation, which wasn't there earlier. And this whole system of GST is based off concurrency. So I have an issue which we can discuss separately, raised in the earlier session, on which I think Narayana also raised it, on loss of autonomy. I would like to argue the other way, that states have now got different kind of autonomy. There's no loss. So once you are concurrent powers to tax, the game changes completely. But more importantly, today the GST system is based on consumption. It's a consumption-based indirect tax regime. Earlier, it was a production-based tax regime. Now, once you change that, the collection of indirect taxes in the state where goods are consumed and not where they are produced. Remember, earlier, it was taxed on where it was produced. Now, it is being taxed on where it is consumed. It makes a tremendous amount of difference. Earlier, the regime was favoring production-oriented states, whether it's Karnataka, whether it is Maharashtra, whether it is Tamil Nadu. Now, the intrinsic structure is towards consumption-based states, whether it was Kashmir or perhaps Kerala, which are high consumption states. So there is that important issue that the nature of regime has changed. Yet, in the 15th Commission, the entire design was as if nothing had happened. Because what happens is the destination principle, which is of consumption, the destination principle of cross-border trade ensures that the poorer consuming states benefit at the expense of the producing states, which is exactly the opposite of what is happening. Now, this has huge implications of how you want to do horizontal transfers. And that is how, as I'll go into it, that how you got deficit grants and stuff like that, the whole idea was a little regressive in terms of the design. But even so, despite the jurisdictional separation of powers having been nullified, the criteria that are relevant to origin-based taxation still continue. Whether it is population, whether it is this, they continue. In my opinion, that should not happen. We must have a new set of criteria because the state's needs are different. Today, a state like J&K would have required in the previous regime a deficit grant. Today, it may not because it is getting fulfilled. So the entire system of horizontal and vertical spin comes into play. Now, what this would mean is really that let's start from the statutory sharing of taxes, both vertical and horizontal, should be re-examined and redesigned. And to align the principle of vertical sharing with the new system, it is important to relook at the entire concept of what is a divisible pool. If you remember the history of how the divisible pool was created, you had first set off only 2 taxes, out of which only a part was given, which was income tax and excise duty, that was increased. And it was the landmark recommendation of the 10th Commission, of which I had the privilege of being associated with, where we said, let's pool everything and give 29% to states. That was the 10th Finance Commission. And that's what became the divisible pool. The fact that today, the divisible pool is determined by the GST Council. It is no longer determined by a budgetary exercise, because what decisions GST Council takes on the GST rates, where states are a participant, forms the divisible pool. And how do you include IGST into that in transition is a huge issue, which I'll come to in a bit. But more importantly, once the criteria are done, devolved, the deficit grants will need to be completely changed, because in the earlier case, the congenital imbalance of states, which was that they cannot meet their constitutional requirements for expenditure by the revenue resources that they have. Hence, the issue of deficit grants did come in. Now, that notion itself will have to undergo a change. It will require specific modalities of making IGST completely a part of the pool. Today, it is not, and that's where the stress is coming from, which is not being recognized. As of now, only IGST with no input tax is shared with states. Why? What would be the logic for that? There must be a normative basis on which credit in transition for unsettled GST, and if people here in this room who are policy makers in the finance department, you can see the kind of anomaly there is between the total collections and those shared with the states, because a large part of it is credit in transition, unsettled IGST, which is actually lying in the Consolidated Fund of India and is being used for a variety of purposes, which is where states are getting into a lot of trouble. So with regard to horizontal distribution, the criteria for distribution of the divisible pool among states will need to be relooked. Whether you want to modify the current one, of course, the fact remains that no matter what benchmark you would look at, you will have to have 2 variants of population and income. Now, you will get into more granular issues given the demographic transition, the quality of population, the weightages and all that would change, but you will need substantially other criteria as well to be able to devolve the monies to the states. This approach somehow has lost sense. I mean, I don't know if people would even recognize that it's way back in 1935 that this whole concept of deficit grants came in. The scheme of governance has itself changed in terms of how states have grown, particularly the states in the southern, that was the discussion in the morning, have changed the entire economic landscape of the country, which needs to be worked out. Similarly, the relationships between the GST Council and the Finance Commission. Ideally, earlier what would happen is when a Finance Commission was set up, the member of financial resources of the Planning Commission would become an ex officio member of the Finance Commission to do coordination. Nothing of that kind is happening now. So the guys who decide the size of the divisible pool are at variance with those who devolve the divisible pool. There must be some connect so that the people who create the pool and the people who divide the pool, both are constitutionally empowered bodies, though Niti Aayog is not a constitutional body, and GST Council perhaps is the first institution of federalism in this country which has elected representative members, and every state has a representation. So to that extent, the relationship between the GST Council and the Finance Commission needs to be redefined. Not only is Finance Commission if you look at the institutional hierarchy of institutions, not only is it constitutional, which Niti Aayog is not, it has elected representations from all the states, ex officio all finance ministers. So it has to have a certain bearing on how the award of this, the Finance Commission, of the GST Council, decides what the Finance Commission does. So that is one big part, that because of GST, the entire vertical and horizontal sharing requires an outlook. You have moved from production to consumption-based taxes, where the interstate distribution of resources has changed, where states which were benefiting earlier because they were producer states are now going to lose because they're consumer states. This necessitates a change in the setup. Second part is that this entire thing was designed for a closed economy. We are now an open economy, which is not driven entirely by public investment, it's driven by private investment, which means there are markets. And these markets are now controlled by regulators. So you take any aspect, whether it is electricity, whether it is any aspect, you look at telecom, liberalization has not reduced the extent of state control. What it has done, it has changed the nature and quality of state control. Today, it may not be a central government department doing it, but it's a regulator doing it. And if you look at the regulatory structure of India, it is nothing but an extended arm of the government of India. Now, instead of seeing a decentralization of power, what you see is a huge concentration of power in these regulators who are all designed by the central government.